If you missed part 1 where I'm making my folks a metal carport, I've already erected the 4 posts, set and welded on the girders, as well as made and welded on the 2 trusses. So continuing on with the build, I moved with my plasma cutter to the tail and cut them to be the exact same length on all 4. Coming back with an angle grinder to clean up all of the edges so I can weld on a end cap later on. Next I moved on to preparing the purlins. I also used the angle grinder here to bevel the edges, which creates a small channel for me to create a better welded seam. Each one of these purlins is around 95 pounds, so what I did before moving them in place on this first one was clamp a board to the truss to act as a shelf. And this worked really well. This way I could lift up one side, set it in place, Cody could lift up the other. I could tack it in a few different places, remove the shelf, and then come back and fully weld it. And since that method worked so well, I ended up using some scraps to make a sturdier shelf. I would locate where the next purlin needed to be and tack it into place on both sides. Then I would run over to the chop saw, move my next piece of joint into place, and cut it to length. So in this shot, you can see both of the temporary supports temporarily welded onto the trusses so that Cody and I could just walk up our respective ladders and set the purlin in place. Then I could come back in and weld it to the truss. After the purlin was welded, I came back with a grinder to grind off the supports and then move them to their next location and repeated. Now I got a few comments in part 1 about the material choice that I'm going with, and I consulted 3 different contractors in my local area before tackling this project, before buying material. And I only wanted 4 posts for this carport. And that decision determined a lot of the other choices for me, which is why I'm going with steel for the purlins instead of wood. But note, if you want to tackle building a carport, that you can save a lot of money if you add a few more supporting posts and use wood instead of steel. And just a tip for you, somebody recommended that I grab a magnetic ground clamp for this project, and it is the best investment I've made so far for welding. So if you see yourself getting into welding more and more, then I definitely recommend it. While setting the purlins in place is an easy concept, moving around such large pieces of steel, especially so high up, was definitely time-consuming and a 2-person job.
Yeah, I'm on.
All right, coming up. Okay, there. Good job.
But taking the time to weld in those temporary shelves on each location made a world of difference when trying to weld these in place. Oh, and for those worried about me tackling a structural project, even though I haven't been welding that long, my brother-in-law is actually a welding inspector. So he checked out the project after I called it a wrap and made sure things were good to go. And that's going to be it for the structure. The entire structure needed to be clean in order to remove the mill scale as well as that surface rust that started getting on it from being set outside over the last few days while I was building it. Cody and I first came through with brushes and cleaning solution on each joint, and then my mom would come back with water hose and wash it off. This was a very tiring process, especially since I was already dead from moving around all of those heavy purlins. But it's definitely not a step that you want to skip. I talked to 2 of my local steel paint shops and first applied a primer that they recommended. It's just the standard red oxidized primer. However, my folks ended up loving the color so much that they decided they didn't want a coat of paint on top of it yet, and they just wanted it left at the red primer. It was far easier to apply the paint with rollers. Then I came back with a brush to all of the spots that a roller couldn't get to. And the final step is to apply a roof. Now I'm going with a polycarbonate roof made by Tuftex, and my folks really wanted the translucent smoke gray color. I would first stack about 5 or 6 sheets on top of one another and then use my angle grinder to cut them to the length needed. And they kind of stick together whenever you do this, but they can very easily be pulled apart. I used a bead of 100% clear silicone on all of the overlapping joints in order to prevent leaking.
To keep birds and insects from nesting inside the corrugations and actually to help prevent leaking around the screws, the company makes these foam closure strips. And actually these come as white, but since my folks really wanted the smoke color, I just spray painted them black.
Then when it came to install, I would first pre-drill through the polycarbonate material, then come back with a self-tapping screw that will go through the polycarbonate, through the closure strip, and into the purlins. And this was an extremely time-consuming part of the process, just because you always have a ladder to be moving around, and you're also working so far away from your body the majority of the time. If you're going to be doing the same, it will definitely speed things up if you could just keep one person on the ground to pass up the next panel or maybe pass up some more screws, and then one person stay up on the ladder actually securing it to the purlins. As you can see, it took a full day to do the roofing, but my folks were very happy with it. The following day, I came back with more closure strips and attached a ridge cap. The Tuftex company doesn't make a matching ridge cap, but I did find this red one that I thought matched the frame perfectly, so that's what I ended up going with.
Yeah, I tell you what, there's almost not a better feeling out there than being able to visualize something, work hard, and then get it done. There was nothing cheap or easy or simple about this project, but I tell you what, this structure is going to last my parents forever. I hope that you enjoyed watching it all come together, and that's it for this one. I will see you soon. Close the lid, and then toss them up to me. Yep. Oh, bad! Bad! Okay, take two. Straight up. Yeah! Thanks, Mama.